Picture this, it's a Thursday afternoon in the middle of summer, 1976. America is celebrating its bicentennial. Kids across the country are enjoying their summer vacation. But in one small California town, summer school is still in session, and 26 children are about to board a bus that will take them on the most terrifying journey of their lives. What happened on July 15, 1976, in Chowchilla, California, would become the largest kidnapping for ransom in American history. It's a story that gripped the nation for days, involving 3 wealthy criminals, 1 heroic bus driver, and 26 brave children who found themselves buried alive in the California earth. This is the untold story of survival, courage, and one of the most audacious crimes ever committed on American soil. Chowchilla, California, in 1976 was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody. Population, about 5,000. The town sits in the heart of California's Central Valley, surrounded by almond orchards, cotton fields, and dairy farms. It's the kind of community where kids ride their bikes without supervision, where doors are left unlocked, and where the worst thing that usually happens is someone's tractor breaks down during harvest season. On July 15, the temperature was climbing toward 100 degrees. At Dairyland Elementary School, summer classes had just ended for the day. It was around 3:30 in the afternoon when the children started filing out of the building, their backpacks slung over their shoulders, ready to head home. Among them were siblings and friends, kids ranging from 5 years old to 14. There was little Jody, only 5, excited to get home and play. There were the Gonzalez brothers, always joking around. There was Monica, a responsible 14-year-old who often helped look after the younger kids. All told, 26 children needed to get home that afternoon. Waiting for them in the parking lot was bus number 26, and behind the wheel sat a man who had become as familiar to these kids as their own parents, Frank Edward Ray, known to everyone as Ed. Ed Ray was 55 years old, a grandfather figure with a gentle demeanor and an unwavering sense of responsibility. He'd been driving school buses in Chowchilla for over 10 years. He knew every child's name, knew which stop each one got off at, knew who needed to be reminded to sit down and who could be trusted to behave. To Ed, these weren't just passengers, they were his kids. As the children climbed aboard that afternoon, chattering about their day and making plans for the evening, Ed did his usual head count. 26. He closed the door, checked his mirrors, and pulled out of the school parking lot. It was 3:45 p.m. In exactly 15 minutes, their lives would change forever. The route from Dairyland Elementary School wound through rural Madera County on Avenue 21, a 2-lane road cutting through farmland. Ed had driven this route thousands of times. He knew every turn, every stop, every pothole. He'd already made several stops, dropping off children along the way. The bus was getting lighter, the remaining kids spreading out across the seats, some dozing in the heat, others staring out the windows at the passing orchards. Then Ed saw it. About a quarter mile ahead, a white van was parked across the road, blocking both lanes. Ed's first thought was that it had broken down. He slowed the bus, preparing to navigate around it if possible. But something felt wrong. As the bus came to a complete stop, Ed's instinct screamed at him. Before he could react, a man wearing pantyhose over his face appeared from behind the van, moving quickly toward the bus. He was young, maybe mid-20s, and in his hands was a shotgun. The masked man yanked open the bus door and jumped inside, shoving the barrel of the gun toward Ed's face. "Move to the back," the man shouted. His voice was muffled by the stalking, high-pitched with adrenaline. "Get to the back of the bus. Now." Behind him, 2 more masked men appeared, also armed. They climbed onto the bus, their weapons pointed at the children. The transformation inside that bus was instantaneous. Seconds before, kids had been talking and laughing. Now, there was only stunned silence, broken by the sound of a 5-year-old girl beginning to cry. "Shut up," one of the kidnappers yelled. "Everyone put your heads down. Don't look at us. If anyone tries to be a hero, we start shooting." Ed Ray's mind was racing. He'd been a military man, had served his country, and he understood dangerous situations. But this? Nothing could have prepared him for this. 26 children were depending on him, and he was staring down the barrel of a gun. "Please," Ed said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "These are just kids. Whatever you want." "Shut your mouth," the gunman interrupted. "Do what we say and nobody gets hurt." One of the other kidnappers moved through the bus, forcing Ed and the children toward the exit. "Everybody off. Single file. Keep your heads down." Outside, the children could see that another van had pulled up behind the bus, this one also white, also waiting. The July heat hit them like a wall as they climbed down the bus steps, their legs shaking, some of the younger ones crying openly now. "Take off your shoes," one of the kidnappers ordered. "All of you. Shoes off. Now." It was a calculated move. Barefoot children couldn't run far on the scorching pavement and rough gravel roads. They were being made helpless. As the children removed their shoes, Ed tried to memorize every detail he could. The vans, both white, both relatively new. The men, 3 of them, all young based on their voices and movements, all white based on the skin visible around the stockings on their faces. One was taller than the others, appeared to be the leader. "Into the vans. Move it." The kidnappers split the group, forcing some into the first van and the rest into the second. Ed went with the second group, making sure he could see as many children as possible. The children were made to sit on the floor of the vans, packed in tight. There were no seats, no windows in the back, just metal walls and darkness. "Anyone tries anything, anyone makes noise, and you'll regret it," one of the kidnappers warned before slamming the doors shut. The last thing the children saw was the afternoon sunlight disappearing as the doors closed, plunging them into complete darkness. Then the engine started, and the vans began to move. It was 4 p.m. Back on Avenue 21, bus number 26 sat empty, its engine still running, a line of small shoes scattered on the ground beside it. 27 people had just vanished. Inside the vans, panic began to set in. The darkness was absolute. The air was already getting hot and stale. Children were pressed against each other, unable to move, barely able to breathe. The younger ones cried for their parents. The older ones sat in shocked silence, trying to process what was happening. Ed Ray's voice cut through the fear. "Listen to me," he said, his tone firm but calm. "Everyone, listen. I need you all to stay calm. Can you do that for me?" From various corners of the van came small voices, "Yes, Mr. Ray." "Good. Now, I'm going to do a roll call. When I say your name, I want you to answer, here, just like in class. That way I know everyone's okay." Ed began calling names, listening for each response in the darkness. His memory didn't fail him, he knew every single child. As each one answered, he felt a small measure of relief. They were scared, but they were alive and together. Monica, the 14-year-old, spoke up. "Mr. Ray, where are they taking us?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Ed admitted. "But I promise you this, we're going to be okay. We're going to stick together, and we're going to get through this." It was a promise he had no idea how he would keep, but he meant every word. The vans drove on. And on. And on. 1 hour passed. Then 2. Then 3. The kidnappers were taking a deliberately confusing route, making turns, doubling back, switching from smooth highway to rough country roads. They were trying to disorient their captives, to make sure no one could figure out where they were being taken. The children, cramped and terrified, began to suffer from the conditions. The heat was unbearable. The air was thick and hard to breathe. Some children felt carsick from the motion and the lack of fresh air. Others desperately needed to use the bathroom but had no choice but to hold it. Ed tried to keep their spirits up, tried to keep them talking, tried to keep them from giving in to the terror. He told stories, asked the kids about their families, their hobbies, their pets. Monica and some of the other older kids helped, doing their best to comfort the younger ones. But as the hours stretched on, hope began to fade. Where were they going? What did these men want? Why hadn't they stopped? The sun set outside, though the children couldn't see it. The vans kept driving through the darkness. 5 hours. 6 hours. 7. Some children dozed fitfully, leaning against each other. Others stayed awake, listening to the sound of the engine, wondering if they would ever see their families again. 8 hours. 9. 10. Finally, around 2 a.m., almost 11 hours after the kidnapping began, the vans slowed down and came to a stop. While Ed and the children were being driven into the night, Chowchilla was descending into chaos. At 5 p.m., when the first children failed to arrive home, parents started making phone calls. To each other. To the school. To the bus barn. By 5:30 p.m., the Madera County Sheriff's Department had been notified. Something was very wrong. A deputy sheriff was sent to drive the bus route, looking for any sign of bus number 26. At approximately 7 p.m., he found it. The bus sat on Avenue 21, exactly where the kidnapping had occurred 3 hours earlier. The engine was no longer running, it had run out of gas. The door was open. Inside, the bus was empty except for the children's belongings, backpacks, lunch boxes, a forgotten sweater, a stuffed animal. On the ground outside the bus, dozens of small shoes lay scattered in the dirt. But there was no sign of Ed Ray. No sign of any of the 26 children. No note, no ransom demand, no explanation. They had simply disappeared. The deputy radioed in his findings, and within minutes, the full weight of law enforcement descended on Chowchilla. Madera County Sheriff's deputies, California Highway Patrol, and FBI agents converged on the scene. Parents arrived at the bus, hoping against hope that there had been some mistake, that their children would somehow be there. Instead, they found only an empty vehicle and more questions than answers. By 9 p.m., the story had broken nationally. News crews were rushing to Chowchilla. The FBI had taken over the investigation. Roadblocks were being set up throughout Central California. Helicopters with searchlights swept over the farmland, looking for any sign of the missing bus passengers. It was the largest kidnapping case in American history, and law enforcement had absolutely no leads. The Chowchilla Community Center became an impromptu command post and gathering place for distraught parents. They clung to each other, praying, crying, demanding answers that no one could provide. Who had taken their children? Why? Where were they? Most terrifying of all, were they still alive? As midnight came and went, the parents kept vigil. They refused to leave, refused to go home to empty houses and vacant bedrooms. They waited for news, for a phone call, for a ransom demand, for anything. But the phone didn't ring. No demands came. The night stretched on with agonizing silence. By dawn on July 16, it had been almost 15 hours since the children were taken. The FBI had interviewed hundreds of people, chased down dozens of leads, and come up empty. Somewhere out there, 27 people were missing. And time was running out. When the van doors finally opened at 2 a.m., Ed and the children found themselves in a desolate rock quarry. Massive piles of gravel loomed in the darkness. Heavy equipment sat silent and still. The place felt like another planet, isolated, industrial, and utterly lifeless. The kidnappers ordered everyone out of the vans. After 11 hours in cramped, sweltering darkness, the children could barely walk. Some collapsed on the ground. Ed helped them to their feet, doing a quick count. 26. All still there. Where are we? One of the children whispered. Ed didn't know. But he was about to find out something much worse. One of the kidnappers pointed toward a large moving truck, the kind used for household furniture relocations, parked about 50 yards away. But this truck wasn't parked on the surface. It had been driven into a massive excavated hole. "Get moving," the kidnapper ordered, gesturing with his gun toward the truck. "All of you. Into the truck." As they got closer, Ed's blood ran cold. The truck had been modified. A hole about 2 feet by 2 feet had been cut into the roof. A ladder extended down into the darkness inside. They were going to be put into that truck. Into that hole. And looking at the piles of dirt and debris nearby, Ed realized with horror what was going to happen next. They were going to be buried alive. "No," Ed said, stepping forward. "Please. You can't." A gun was shoved into his ribs. "You first. Down the ladder. Now." Ed had no choice. If he resisted, if he fought back, the children would pay the price. He looked at the frightened faces around him and made a decision: he would go first. He would show them it was okay. He would be brave so they could be brave. He climbed down the ladder into the darkness. The truck had been converted into a makeshift underground prison. The floor was covered with mattresses. There were several water jugs, some bread, peanut butter, and dry cereal. A few battery-powered lights provided dim illumination. The ceiling was only about 4 feet high. Ed couldn't stand up straight. And most concerning of all, the ventilation came from only 2 small air pipes extending through the roof. One by one, the 26 children were forced down the ladder. Some of the younger ones had to be carried. Ed helped each one down, positioning them carefully, trying to make them as comfortable as possible in the cramped space. The last child descended. Then one of the kidnappers appeared at the opening above. "There's food and water," he said, his voice echoing in the metal tomb. "Someone will come for you eventually. Don't try anything stupid." Then he was gone. The children heard the sound of the metal plate being positioned over the entrance hole. Then came another sound, the sound that would haunt their nightmares for years to come. The sound of dirt hitting the roof of the truck. They were being buried. Shovel by shovel, load by load, the kidnappers piled dirt, rocks, and debris on top of the truck. The sounds echoed through their prison, thump, 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 as their tomb was sealed. Some children screamed. Others cried silently. The younger ones called for their mothers. Ed gathered them close. "Listen to me," he said. "We're going to be okay. We're going to get through this together." But even as he said the words, he wondered if they were true. They were buried alive, with limited air, limited supplies, and no way to signal for help. No one knew where they were. The kidnappers could ask for ransom, collect their money, and leave them here to suffocate. Above ground, the kidnappers finished covering the truck and left the quarry. Their plan was simple: drive to safety, call in their ransom demand of $5 million, and wait for the money to be paid. They believed the victims would survive for several days with the food, water, and air supply they'd provided. What they didn't know was that their plan was already falling apart. The hours inside the buried truck were beyond description. The darkness was oppressive when they turned off the lights to save battery power. The heat was stifling. The air was already becoming harder to breathe. 27 people were consuming oxygen in a sealed metal container, and the 2 small ventilation pipes weren't providing nearly enough fresh air. Ed Ray knew they were in serious danger. He could feel it in his lungs, in the way his head was starting to pound. The children were showing signs of oxygen deprivation, some were getting drowsy, others were becoming confused and disoriented. He organized a schedule: they would turn on the lights periodically to check on everyone. He rationed the water carefully, making sure the younger children drank enough. He kept everyone talking, kept them awake, kept them focused. Monica and several other older students became Ed's assistants. They helped calm the younger children, led them in songs and games, anything to keep their minds off their situation. But as the hours passed, their situation grew more desperate. The makeshift bathroom was overwhelmed. The smell was terrible. The heat was getting worse. Several children were feeling sick. And the air was definitely getting thinner. Ed made a decision. They couldn't wait for rescue. Even if the FBI somehow figured out where they were, would they arrive in time? Every hour that passed, every breath they took, consumed more of their precious oxygen. They were going to have to save themselves. He began examining the ceiling of the truck, looking for any weakness, any possible way out. The entrance they had been forced through was covered by a heavy metal plate and buried under tons of dirt and debris. It seemed impossible. But then Ed noticed something. The plywood boards that made up part of the ceiling weren't as strong as the metal plate. And one section, near where the air pipes were located, seemed slightly weaker than the others. It was a long shot. But it was the only shot they had. "I'm going to try to dig us out," Ed announced to the group. Some of the older boys immediately volunteered to help. They stacked mattresses to create a platform so they could reach the ceiling. Then, using their bare hands, they began to push against the plywood, trying to create an opening. It was exhausting, terrifying work. Every time they made progress, dirt would rain down on them, threatening to bury them inside their own prison. The children below held up blankets to catch the debris. Hours passed. Ed and the boys kept working, their hands bleeding, their muscles screaming in pain. They pushed and pried, scooped and dug. Slowly, painfully, they began to make progress. Outside, dawn was breaking on July 16th. In Chowchilla, parents who hadn't slept all night were desperately hoping for a miracle. Inside the buried truck, Ed Ray was creating that miracle with his bare hands. By afternoon on July 16th, more than 24 hours after the kidnapping began, Ed Ray had created a small opening in the ceiling. Light filtered through the dirt above. Real light. Daylight. Fresh air. The children, exhausted and terrified, felt a surge of hope. "We're almost there," Ed said, his voice hoarse from exertion. "Just a little more." With renewed strength, Ed and the older boys pushed through the remaining debris. Ed's hands were raw and bleeding. His body was screaming in protest. But he didn't stop. Finally, the hole was big enough. Ed Ray, covered in dirt and blood, squeezed through the opening and emerged into the California sunshine. He had been buried alive for 16 hours. He pulled himself onto solid ground, gasping in the fresh air, his eyes watering in the bright light. Then he turned back to the hole and reached down. "Come on," he said. "One at a time. I've got you." One by one, the children emerged from their underground tomb. Ed pulled them out, counting each one, making sure not a single child was left behind. 26 children. Every single one. They stood in the rock quarry, dirty and exhausted, blinking in the sunlight like people raised from the dead. Because that's exactly what they were. Several of the younger children collapsed. The older students helped them, carrying those too weak to walk. Ed looked around, getting his bearings. He could see buildings in the distance, the quarry office. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." Supporting each other, the group began walking toward civilization. At approximately 6 p.m. on July 16th, two quarry workers saw something they would never forget, a group of children and one man, all covered in dirt, emerging from the excavation area. Within minutes, police and ambulances were on the scene. Ed Ray identified himself and explained what had happened. The news went out immediately. The missing children from Chowchilla had been found alive. In Chowchilla, parents who had been keeping vigil for over 24 hours broke down sobbing when they heard the news. Across America, people who had been following the story celebrated. Against impossible odds, all 26 children had survived. The children were taken to local hospitals for examination. Remarkably, despite their horrific ordeal, none had sustained serious physical injuries. They were dehydrated, exhausted, and traumatized, but alive. Ed Ray was treated for his injuries and hailed as a hero. He deflected the praise. "I was just doing my job," he said simply. "Taking care of my kids." But everyone knew the truth. Without Ed's courage, without his refusal to give up, without his desperate determination to dig them out, the story would have ended in tragedy. The FBI immediately descended on the rock quarry. They found the buried truck, the 2 white vans, and crucial evidence that would lead them to the kidnappers. The investigation moved quickly. The moving truck was traced through its vehicle identification number. The vans were tracked through their purchase records. Within 48 hours, the FBI had identified 3 suspects. Frederick Woods IV, age 24, the son of a wealthy quarry owner. James Schoenfeld, age 24, from an affluent family. Richard Schoenfeld, age 22, James's younger brother. All 3 came from privilege. This wasn't a crime of desperation, it was a crime of greed. Richard Schoenfeld turned himself in on July 23. James was arrested shortly after in Northern California. But Frederick Woods, the ringleader, went on the run. For 2 weeks, Woods evaded capture, reportedly hiding in Canada. But with his face on every news broadcast and newspaper in North America, he couldn't hide forever. On July 29, Woods was arrested in Vancouver and extradited back to California. The trial revealed the shocking extent of their planning. For nearly a year, these 3 men had plotted the kidnapping. They had purchased the vans, acquired the truck, excavated the hole, and prepared their underground prison, all while leading normal lives. Their plan had one fatal flaw: they never successfully called in a ransom demand. The Chowchilla police phone lines had been jammed with calls from media and concerned citizens. The kidnappers tried multiple times to get through but couldn't. They gave up, planning to try again later. By the time they learned the victims had escaped, it was too late. All 3 men were convicted and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. For the victims, however, the sentence was also life, a life forever changed by one terrible day in July. Many of the children suffered from PTSD, nightmares, and anxiety for years. Some required extensive therapy. The psychological scars remained long after the physical ordeal ended. Ed Ray continued driving his bus route but was never quite the same. He rarely spoke about the kidnapping publicly. He passed away in 2012 at age 91, remembered as the man who saved 26 lives. Over the years, all 3 kidnappers have been granted parole, despite opposition from victims. Richard Schoenfeld was released in 2012, James in 2015, and Frederick Woods in 2022. For the survivors, the fight for justice continues, but so does their resilience. They carry the weight of that day, but they also carry something else, the knowledge that they survived the unthinkable. The Chowchilla kidnapping stands as a reminder of both human cruelty and human courage, of how 3 men could commit such evil, and how 1 bus driver and 26 brave children could overcome it. On July 16, 1976, Ed Ray promised those children they would be okay. And through sheer determination, through courage in the face of absolute terror, he kept that promise. Sometimes heroes drive school buses. And sometimes, survival requires nothing more, and nothing less, than refusing to give up.